We wanted to take this opportunity just a day before I introduce to the legislature for their consideration the May revise, a revision of our January budget proposal, to update people on the efforts that are underway on emergency preparedness and emergency planning here in the state of California. And that's why we're here in El Dorado County, not far from our Office of Emergency Services, where so much of the work and preparation is being done for the next fire season. We are mindful of the threats. We are mindful of the understandable anxiety that this time of year presents to people, in addition to what's going on with COVID-19. And I want folks to know that we have been preparing for this upcoming wildfire season. And we're not stepping back our efforts. We're in fact stepping them up. Enhancements for wildfire preparation and preparedness across the board, as well as suppression strategies and opportunities to be more resilient in our recovery strategies. We just ran some numbers from January to May 10th last year. It's roughly a 60% increase this year compared to last year in the total number of wildfires. We had announced last year that we were focusing on 200 vulnerable communities in the state of California, and really focused our efforts on 35 high-profile vegetation and fuel management projects. We continue to do more than we've done in the past on defensible spaces. Our fuels management and vegetation management are not just focused on those 35 high-profile projects. They exist and persist all throughout the state of California. They're complemented by private sector work in that space, by local work in that space, and by the state's efforts themselves. Some 450,000 acres in 2020 will be advanced in terms of the fuels management, in terms of the vegetation management, in some cases some prescribed burns, and others some reforestation. In that portfolio, we're getting more work done than we have in the past. Fire season always is anxiety-inducing for an additional reason, and that's the issues of PSPS. Those are 4 letters that most Californians, at least in Northern California in particular, are familiar with, but those in Southern California as well. These are the power shutoff that we experienced in record numbers last year. In an effort to do more and do better, as you may recall, a few months ago, the top story that focused our attention and focused our efforts in the legislature and in my office was working to help get PG&E back on its feet and out of bankruptcy, and to help the 3 other investor-owned utilities, or 2 others, 3 total in the state, investor-owned utilities, to be more secure, not only financially, but more secure in their capacity to invest in your future and our collective future. And what I mean by that is to make the investments themselves, independent of the state, federal, local, and private sector, to invest in their own efforts to secure their wires, their poles, to advance their undergrounding, to focus on secularizers and making sure that they have greater capacity in real time to have information with infrared cameras and weather stations, their efforts to do more on their own vegetation management, to secure their own aerial fleet, to provide more air support for recovery efforts, to do more on your behalf to secure wildfire safety and public safety. I want to update you just in those efforts. You may recall there was an effort that the legislature and our team advanced that required certain things from our investor-owned utilities. I want to update you on what those are and remind you how important they are to our larger wildfire efforts. $5 billion is required of our investor-owned utilities in safety measures. That's a requirement pursuant to the agreement we advanced that must come from the IOUs directly, independent, again, of all of these state efforts. We created a wildfire advisory committee to focus on public safety. That is also a requirement under that bill and these efforts. We are announcing tomorrow in our budget, the Public Utilities Commission is building a team of 106 individuals that will create a wildfire safety division within the Public Utilities Commission. That division will become an independent entity, but right now it will start within the Public Utilities Commission. That division will 24/7 oversee the efforts of all three of our largest investor-owned utilities. We have a monitor now that we have put in place, for example, at PG&E, to independently monitor their safety efforts. We have safety mitigation plans, what we call wildfire mitigation plans, that are a requirement to be certified by the boards of these utilities and then ultimately by the Public Utility Commission with an advisory committee that will advise the Commission. It's a way of saying we are in a place we've never been in the past in terms of oversight and accountability and transparency with our investor-owned utilities to help support these wildfire mitigation efforts. I am not naive that these utilities are where they need to be. Quite the contrary. In fact, PG&E is still in bankruptcy. They have the opportunity to come out of bankruptcy by June 30th, but a predicate of all of that are fulfilling the requirements of these plans. But we will do our part, and that is to make sure that there's real transparency and accountability to these utilities, and to make sure that they do justice to what they're promising and what has been promoted in terms of these requirements. So that's just a quick update on where the IOUs are. And by the way, I just do want to recognize that PG&E has significantly increased their number of weather stations, significantly increased their high-definition cameras, and has committed to new protocols on the PSPS, where they have committed to us a duration reduction of roughly 50% in terms of their time to provide what we refer to as an all clear and then turning on your lights. We'll hold them to account in that respect. I don't hold my breath in any of these categories. We've been sobered by the reality of PG&E in particular over the last number of years. But we are emerging in a different frame, in a different space, and a different framework of engagement now and oversight that I hope can allow people to rest, well, maybe not with both eyes closed, but one eye open, but rest assured that we are taking these efforts very, very seriously and holding this company to account in ways they haven't been in the past. So from the IOUs to the work that the Public Utilities Commission will be doing, to a budget that will increase at the Office of Emergency Services over the existing baseline budget approved last year by $127 million. We will be improving the budget at the Office of Emergency Service to provide for ongoing monitoring, not just of oversight related to wildfires, but also all other hazards. We talk in terms of all hazards. That includes earthquakes. And I'm, again, maybe just being born and bred, 5th-generation Bay Area resident, San Francisco resident. Earthquakes continue to be top of my mind. There's $17.3 million in this budget for our early warning system, for our earthquake system. We're going to transfer our Seismic Safety Committee into the Office of Emergency Services for stronger integration, $2.2 million of budget enhancement that I'm recommending for the legislature's consideration. We'll announce tomorrow. In addition to that, we are looking to do more in terms of our disaster assistance, some $38.2 million of enhancements in that effort. I referenced PSPS. We're going to put $50 million in the budget to help support grants for local counties to help in their efforts around PSPS. And by the way, that matters this year in particular because there's some concern around PSPS turning off the lights during the election. And so we want to secure the election as well. And so those dollars are for that consideration in addition to other considerations as it relates to backup generators and more broad planning. Speaking of planning and preparedness, there's an additional $9.2 million for baseline support for a number of individuals that we believe are important to enhance the Office of Emergency Service in this category as well. Speaking of categories, I have neglected one, and it's important as I segue and introduce Chief Porter, and that's CAL FIRE in particular. Separate from the $127 million enhancement, the Office of Emergency Service above the current baseline that we're proposing to the legislature, we are also proposing $85.7 million enhancement to CAL FIRE, specifically to improve surge capacity and to hire critical personnel before the peak of this year's fire season. Roughly 600 additional personnel, we believe, are needed to protect people from wildfires to the extent we can protect you and help mitigate the ferocity of these wildfires. So this is a significant enhancement in terms of the overall ranks at CAL FIRE, and we're just going to hold the line on that. We're going to work with the legislature, and I hope together we can together hold the line in terms of the importance of these personnel. So that's an enhancement in that space. I can mention a number of others from work we're doing with Technosilva in terms of predictive modeling, which is important, new tools, new technology that we'll bring to bear, which will also help with our wildfire efforts. But foundationally, people. There's no substitute for people. And those people, by the way, will also be supported by these engines. We're able to get, by July of this year, we will have an additional 26 new engines all throughout the state of California, including 4 incident command units that will also be deployed by July 1st. We're going to have other equipment, even outside of just these engines, and they include new Black Hawk helicopters. You may recall we promoted the procurement of 12 Black Hawk helicopters. We're not going to walk that back. It's just too important in terms of our mutual aid and public safety in the state of California. I want folks to know those helicopters are now arriving. The first one came in October of last year. In fact, it was just used in that red fire up in Tehama County. These Black Hawks are extraordinary. They provide faster suppression capacity, a more robust ability in terms of number of gallons of water that they're able to disperse. They're safer for our personnel in terms of redundancy, double twin turbine engine. I can go on and on with the specs of these. I think they're S701 Black Hawks, but 12 of them are coming in. The first one came in October. Another one's coming in this month. Another one after that next month. We'll start to see these Black Hawks in our fleet, and I just think that's fundamental and foundational to our suppression efforts and our ability, again, to meet the public safety needs in this state.